The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds as King Charles sat in his private study, surrounded by centuries of royal history. The weight of the crown seemed heavier these past 3 days, ever since his beloved daughter-in-law Kate had vanished without a trace. The usually composed monarch found himself staring at the ornate clock on the mantel, watching each second tick by with agonizing slowness. Kate had been visiting a children's hospital in North London when she disappeared. The security footage showed her entering the building at precisely 10:47 a.m., but she never emerged. Her protection officers, who had been waiting outside as per her request for a more intimate visit with the young patients, raised the alarm when she failed to appear for her scheduled departure at noon. The hospital staff insisted she had left through a side entrance, but no cameras captured this supposed exit. The palace had maintained a careful silence, releasing only a brief statement about a private matter requiring the Duchess's immediate attention. Behind the fortress walls of tradition and protocol, panic reigned. William had not slept since that day, his eyes hollow with worry as he coordinated with Scotland Yard's finest investigators. The children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, had been told their mother was on a special mission, but even they sensed the tremor of fear running through the household. Charles remembered the last conversation he had with Kate. She had come to him seeking advice about a delicate matter involving one of the charities she patronized. There had been something in her eyes that day, a shadow of concern that he had dismissed as typical pre-engagement nerves. Now, replaying that moment in his mind, he wondered if he had missed crucial signs. The investigation had uncovered troubling details. Kate's personal phone had been found in a dustbin 3 blocks from a hospital, its screen cracked, but still functional. The last message sent from it was to an unknown number, containing only coordinates to a location in the Scottish Highlands. When police arrived at the remote spot, they found only an abandoned cottage with signs of recent habitation, but no trace of Kate. Detective Chief Inspector Margaret Hayes, leading the investigation, had briefed the king just hours ago. "Your Majesty," she had said, her voice steady despite the unprecedented nature of the case. "We have reason to believe the Duchess may have uncovered something significant in her charity work. Several large financial transactions from one of the organizations she was investigating have been flagged by our forensic accountants. The charity in question, Safe Harbor, provided shelter for vulnerable women and children. Kate had taken a special interest in it after hearing testimonies from some of the residents. She had mentioned to Charles her concern about discrepancies in their reported numbers versus the actual occupancy of their facilities. What started as routine due diligence had apparently led her down a dangerous path. Meanwhile, across London, a young journalist named Emma Thompson sat in her cramped flat, staring at an encrypted email that had arrived in her inbox that morning. The sender was anonymous, but the subject line made her heart race. The real reason she's gone. Emma had been investigating Safe Harbor for months, following a tip from a source within the organization. Her research had revealed a complex web of connections between the charity and several offshore companies with dubious ownership. The email contained a single photograph. Kate, dressed in casual clothes rather than her usual elegant attire, meeting with a woman whose face was obscured by shadows. The timestamp showed it was taken 2 days before her disappearance. Emma recognized the location immediately. It was a small cafe in East London where she herself had met with whistleblowers. The implications were staggering. Had the Duchess been conducting her own investigation? Back at the palace, Charles was interrupted from his brooding by his private secretary, Sir Edward Pemberton. "Your Majesty, we've received something rather unusual through the diplomatic pouch from our embassy in Switzerland." The older man's hands trembled slightly as he handed over a sealed envelope. It bore no return address, only the royal cipher drawn in what appeared to be Kate's distinctive hand. With careful fingers, Charles opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Kate's neat handwriting. As he read, his expression shifted from confusion to alarm to something approaching awe. The message was dated 3 days prior, the day she had vanished. "Your Majesty," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then my plan has been set in motion. Please do not be alarmed. What I am about to do is necessary to protect not just our family, but countless innocent lives. Safe harbor is not what it seems. It is a front for something far more sinister, a trafficking network that has operated under the cover of charity for years. The letter continued, detailing Kate's discoveries over the past months. She had been approached by a woman named Maria, a former resident of Safe Harbor who had escaped from what she described as modern slavery. Maria's story had been harrowing. Promised sanctuary in the UK, she and dozens of other women had instead been forced into servitude, their documents confiscated, their children used as leverage to ensure compliance. Kate had initially wanted to go through official channels, but she discovered that the network had connections reaching into law enforcement and government agencies. Any formal investigation would be compromised before it began. So she had made a desperate decision to go underground herself to gather irrefutable evidence that could bring down the entire operation. I know this will cause distress, her letter continued, but I could not stand by while knowing what I know. I have made arrangements with trusted allies. By the time you read this, I will have infiltrated their operation. The financial records, testimony from victims, and photographic evidence are stored in a safety deposit box at Coutts Bank under the name Sarah Chapman, my grandmother's maiden name. The key is hidden in the music box in Charlotte's room, inside the ballerina's base. Charles felt his legs weaken, and he sank into his chair. His daughter-in-law, the future queen consort, had voluntarily placed herself in mortal danger to save strangers. It was an act of extraordinary courage and devastating foolishness. He immediately summoned Sir Edward and Detective Chief Inspector Hayes. As they waited for their arrival, Charles continued reading. Kate had outlined a complex plan. She had created a false identity, complete with documentation that would pass cursory inspection. She had been learning Russian and Romanian from one of the palace staff, languages commonly spoken by trafficking victims. Most crucially, she had established a communication protocol. If she failed to send a coded message every 48 hours, her allies were to release all evidence to the press and authorities simultaneously. The last part of the letter was personal. Tell William I, love him more than words can express. Tell the children their mother is fighting for what's right, just as I've always taught them to do. And tell them I will come home. I promise I will come home. Detective Chief Inspector Hayes arrived within minutes, her face grim as she absorbed this new information. Your Majesty, this changes everything. If the Duchess has infiltrated a trafficking ring, she's in extreme danger. These organizations don't hesitate to eliminate threats. Then, we must find her immediately, Charles said, his voice carrying the authority of 1,000 years of monarchy. Discreetly, if what she says is true, we cannot trust normal channels. Hayes nodded. I have a small team of officers I trust implicitly. We'll need to move carefully. If the traffickers suspect we're onto them, they might. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Sir Edward had already retrieved the key from Charlotte's music box, handling the delicate task with surprising gentleness. Within an hour, a trusted aide had returned from Coutts Bank with a small mountain of evidence. Kate had been thorough. Financial records showing millions of pounds laundered through Safe Harbor, photographs of young women being loaded into unmarked vans, recorded conversations between charity officials discussing shipments and merchandise. Most damning was a ledger containing names, dates, and destinations. Hundreds of vulnerable women and children had been trafficked through Safe Harbor over the past 5 years. Some entries were marked with red X's. Hayes didn't want to speculate on what those meant. As the team pored over the evidence, a pattern emerged. The trafficking ring operated on a schedule, moving their victims every few weeks to avoid detection. Based on Kate's notes, the next transfer was scheduled for tonight at a warehouse in Dover, where the victims would be loaded onto a ferry bound for the continent. We have to intercept, Hayes said. If the Duchess is with them, this might be our only chance. Charles stood, his 74 years seeming to fall away as he straightened his shoulders. Then we go to Dover. I won't sit here while Kate risks everything. Your Majesty, I cannot allow, Sir Edward began, but Charles cut him off with a gesture. I am not asking permission. Ready the car. As they prepared to leave, William arrived, having been summoned urgently from his own search efforts. The reunion between father and son was brief, but emotional. Charles showed William the letter, watching as his son's face cycled through the same emotions he had experienced. "She didn't tell me," William said, his voice hollow. "She didn't trust me enough to tell me. She was protecting you," Charles said gently. "And the children. If you had known, you would have tried to stop her." "Of course I would have." William's composure finally cracked. "She's my wife, the mother of my children. How could she?" "Because she's Kate," Charles interrupted. "Because she saw suffering and couldn't turn away. It's one of the reasons we all love her." The convoy that departed the palace was small and unmarked. Charles and William rode with Detective Chief Inspector Hayes and her team as they sped through the London streets. Hayes coordinated with her trusted officers via encrypted radio. The warehouse in Dover had been under surveillance for the past hour. Unusual activity had been reported. Vans arriving, people being moved under cover of darkness. The journey to Dover took just over 2 hours, each minute stretching endlessly. Charles found himself praying, something he rarely did outside of official ceremonies. He prayed for Kate's safety, for the women and children she was trying to save, for the strength to face whatever they might find. As they approached the warehouse district, Hayes received an urgent communication. "Sir, our surveillance team reports a woman matching the Duchess's description being moved from one of the buildings. She appears to be resisting." William grabbed the radio. "Is she hurt? Can you see if she's hurt?" "Unable to determine from this distance, sir." "Should we move in?" Hayes looked to Charles, protocol warring with urgency in her expression. Charles made the decision. "We go in. Now." The raid was swift and precise. Hayes' team, supplemented by special forces who had been briefed en route, surrounded the warehouse. Charles and William were ordered to remain in the vehicle, but both men stood ready to defy that order if necessary. The sound of flashbang grenades and shouted commands filled the air. Minutes felt like hours before Hayes' voice crackled over the radio. "We have her. The Duchess is secure. Repeat, the Duchess is secure." William was out of the car before the transmission ended, Charles close behind despite Sir Edward's protests. They found Kate in the warehouse office, looking exhausted, but unharmed. She was surrounded by young women, some barely more than children, all wearing the same gray uniforms, all bearing the hollow-eyed look of those who had seen too much. "William," Kate said, her voice cracking. "Your Majesty." "I can explain," but William had already crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, his body shaking with relief and residual fear. Charles stood back, allowing his son and daughter-in-law their moment while surveying the scene. Dozens of victims were being led to safety, their captors arrested by Hayes' team. The evidence Kate had gathered would ensure convictions. Later, as Kate was checked by medical personnel, she told her story. She had successfully infiltrated the organization by posing as a Romanian immigrant seeking shelter. The past 3 days had been harrowing. She had witnessed firsthand the conditions these women endured, the threats used to keep them compliant, the casual cruelty of their captors. "I documented everything," she said, showing them a small camera disguised as a button. "Names, faces, contacts. This goes deeper than we thought. Safe Harbor is just one node in an international network." Detective Chief Inspector Hayes confirmed that the arrests had yielded significant intelligence. "Your Majesty," she addressed Charles, "the Duchess's actions, while unorthodox and dangerous, have exposed one of the largest trafficking operations in Europe. The evidence she gathered will save hundreds of lives." "Thousands," Kate corrected quietly. "Based on their records, thousands." As dawn broke over Dover, the warehouse district swarmed with law enforcement. The victims were being processed, offered medical care, psychological support, and, most importantly, freedom. Many wept as they realized their ordeal was over. Charles watched Kate as she moved among them, offering comfort despite her own exhaustion. She spoke to them in their own languages, held their hands, promised that they would be safe now. This was why she had risked everything, not for glory or adventure, but because she couldn't bear to know of their suffering and do nothing. The journey back to London was subdued. Kate sat between William and Charles, her head on her husband's shoulder, her hand in her father-in-law's. The public would be told a carefully crafted story about a security threat that had required the Duchess to be temporarily relocated. The full truth would remain classified, known only to a select few. But changes would come. Safe Harbor and its network would be dismantled. New protocols would be established for vetting royal charities. Most importantly, a new initiative would be launched, headed by Kate, now that she could work in the open, to combat human trafficking and support its victims. As they arrived back at Kensington Palace, the children rushed out to greet their mother. Kate knelt to embrace them, tears finally flowing as she held them close. George, always perceptive, asked if she had completed her special mission. "Yes, darling," Kate said, her voice steady despite her tears. "The mission is complete." Charles watched the reunion, reflecting on the events of the past 3 days. His daughter-in-law had shown a courage that rivaled any in the long history of the monarchy. She had risked not just her life, but her position, her reputation, everything she held dear for people society had forgotten. In his study that evening, Charles penned a private letter to Kate. In it, he expressed not just his relief at her safe return, but his profound admiration for her actions. "You have shown us all what true nobility means," he wrote. "It is not about titles or ceremony, but about the willingness to stand for what is right, regardless of the cost." Kate's response came the next morning, hand-delivered by a footman. It was brief, but heartfelt. "Your Majesty, I did only what you and her late Majesty have always taught by example, that with great privilege comes great responsibility. Thank you for trusting me, even when I gave you every reason not to. Your loving daughter-in-law, Catherine." The trafficking ring's trials would dominate headlines for months. Over 100 perpetrators were convicted, their network dismantled piece by piece. Safe Harbor's assets were liquidated and used to support legitimate charities serving trafficking victims. The women and children Kate had helped rescue were offered asylum, education, and the chance to rebuild their lives. Kate herself returned to her royal duties, but with a new focus. She established the Phoenix Foundation, dedicated to supporting trafficking survivors and preventing future exploitation. The foundation's work was thorough, uncompromising, and incredibly effective, much like its founder. In private moments, William would sometimes catch Kate staring into the distance, and he knew she was thinking of those 3 days. The experience had changed her, added steel to her compassion. She had always been dedicated to her causes, but now she approached them with the fierce determination of someone who had seen the worst of humanity and refused to look away. Charles, for his part, never forgot the morning he received Kate's letter. It served as a reminder that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest acts of bravery happen not on battlefields, but in the shadows, performed by those who seek no recognition, only justice. The music box in Charlotte's room remained where it had always been, its hidden compartment now empty, but still significant. Sometimes Kate would wind it up and watch the ballerina spin, remembering the weight of the key it had once held, the secrets it had guarded, and the lives it had helped save. Years later, when Charlotte was old enough to understand, Kate would tell her the story. She would explain how the music box had played a small, but crucial role in a larger fight against evil. Charlotte would listen with wide eyes, understanding for the first time that her mother was not just a princess, but a warrior in her own right. The official records would never reflect the full truth of those 3 days when Kate disappeared. History would remember other things about her reign as Princess of Wales and later as Queen. But for those who knew, for Charles, William, Detective Chief Inspector Hayes, and the hundreds of women whose lives she had saved, Kate would forever be the princess who chose to disappear into darkness so that others might find the light. And in the quiet moments, when the palace was still and the weight of duty pressed heavy, Charles would remember that morning 3 days after Kate disappeared, when her final message had arrived. He would remember the fear, the pride, and most of all, the profound gratitude that the monarchy had been blessed with someone willing to risk everything for what was right. The letter itself was kept in the royal archives, sealed and classified, but its impact rippled outward in ways both seen and unseen. Policies changed, lives were saved, and a new standard was set for what it meant to serve. Kate had shown them all that true royalty was not about wearing a crown, but about being willing to take it off and fight in the trenches when justice demanded it. As the sun set on another day at the palace, Charles stood at his window, looking out over the grounds where his grandchildren played under their mother's watchful eye. Kate caught his gaze and smiled, a silent acknowledgment passing between them. They had weathered the storm together, and in doing so had forged bonds stronger than any protocol or tradition. The 3 days of Kate's disappearance had ended with her safe return, but their impact would last forever. They served as a testament to the power of individual courage, the importance of fighting for those who cannot fight for themselves, and the truth that sometimes to truly serve, one must be willing to step away from the spotlight and into the shadows where the real work is done. In the end, that was Kate's greatest message, delivered not through diplomatic channels or official statements, but through her actions during those 3 fateful days. She had shown that royalty, at its best, was not about privilege, but about purpose, not about status, but about service, not about being seen, but about seeing those who needed help and doing something about it. And so life continued at the palace, forever changed by those 3 days when a princess disappeared and a hero emerged, leaving behind a legacy written not in gold leaf or grand pronouncements, but in the grateful tears of those she had saved and the quiet pride of a family who had learned what true courage looked like.